Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on any purchase over $10. See the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again where we check in on the results from the major tournaments of the weekend. Today we're going to be looking at one event, and that is the Grand Prix at MagicFest Memphis. This was a standard event. We're going to look at all of the top 8 deck lists with a special focus on the cards from Ravnica Allegiance that performed well this weekend. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel. Our Patreon page is down there. That always helps us a lot. You'll also find product links for things on Amazon. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through one of those initial links, we'll get a small percentage. Finally, Flipside Gaming, of course, still offering the promo code for our viewers. Whenever you use that code, that helps us out too. But as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all of you. You've all made the channel what it is, so thank you, and let's get into it. Here is your top 8. So you're going to see quite a bit of variety actually in this top 8, and we're seeing a few decks perform well that maybe didn't perform as well over the last couple weeks. First place, Rakdos Aggro, put up a good result last week, but takes down the tournament this week. Second and third, Sultai Midrange. Fourth place, Gruul Midrange. Really cool to see a Gruul deck get here. Fifth place, Simic Nexus, the only Nexus deck on our top 8 today. Sixth place, Mono White Aggro. Seventh and eighth was Mono Blue Aggro. So let's jump into these deck lists. Here's your first place Rakdos Aggro deck. You could argue that this has more of a mid-range feel in some ways as opposed to flat on aggro. You see some larger spells here. Things like 4 Rekindling Phoenixes, 3 Siege Gang Commanders, a Karn Sign of Urza makes it here. You also have the Eldest Reborn, 2 of those. Aside from that, though, you do have smaller creatures too. Direfleet Daredevil, 4 of those, 4 Goblin Chain Whirlers. And aside from that, you have some of your important spells, 2 Shocks, 4 Lava Coils, of course, in here. This deck is also running 4 Treasure Maps. Let's take a look at the new cards, though, that contribute to the deck. Rixmati Reveler is a great card in this deck. Carnival and Carnage shows up, and Blood Crypt. Out of the sideboard, Theater of Horrors. Here's your second place Sultai midrange deck. We'll look at both the second and third place decks. Now, if you're familiar with the Golgari midrange deck from last season, you're not going to see a whole lot different, especially in this build. There's a good reason, though, to work some blue into it, which we'll look at in just a couple seconds, but look at your familiar cards first. Llanowar Elves, 4 of those, 4 Jadelight Ranger, 4 Wild Growth Walkers are in here, 4 Merfolk Branch Walkers. This build is running 1 Carnage Tyrant, and notice the 2 Hostage Takers in the main and 1 in the sideboard. That is one thing you can do with your blue mana. As for the non-creature spells, you get an Assassin's Trophy, a couple Cast Downs, a couple Vraska's Contempts, 3 copies of Vivian Reed in the main, which feels like a pretty standard amount now for this particular build. Let's look at the cards from the new set, though. And here's your main reason for playing some blue. Hydroid Krasis, and then you have Breeding Pool to give you that blue mana. Out of the sideboard, you also have Cry of the Carnarium. Okay, now here's the third place Sultai midrange deck. Very similar. You're going to notice that the deck is almost identical in a lot of ways. However, there are some small differences here. Notice there's a copy of Vraska Relic Seeker in the main, no Carnage Tyrant though in this one. There's also a few small differences when it comes to the new cards. In addition to the Hydroid Krasis and Breeding Pool, you're also getting 2 copies of Incubation Druid in the main, nothing in the sideboard this time from Ravnica Allegiance. Gruul Midrange came in 4th place, and I was happy to see this deck perform well. It felt like it was getting close there. It finally broke through this week. It is a solid build, and I think we're going to see more of these in the weeks to come. We also may see more aggro versions of this deck, or definitely more Rakdos midrange and aggro decks, or even mono red, just because I feel like that's where we are in the meta, that we're on the cusp of seeing some of these more aggressive decks perform better. Also, the Pro Tour is coming up, which has a unique meta onto its own compared to a regular GP because it is a smaller field and people are trying to guess what other folks are going to be playing there. And they have a lot of knowledge too, as opposed to going into a GP where you have a lot of people that could be playing almost anything. So at least in recent years, it feels like aggro is very good in those particular events. And sometimes that at least inspires some people to play aggro with the GPs and Friday Night Magic as well. So we'll have to see what happens going forward there. But let's look at this deck. Direfleet Daredevil, 3 of those. One of the cards that we just saw in that Rakdos aggro deck. So you're going to see some similar cards here. 4 Goblin Chain Whirler. Those made it here too. 4 Rekindling Phoenix. 3 Siege Gang Commander. 4 Shocks here. 2 Lava Coils. A lot of very similar cards, right? Well, let's look at the cards from Guilds of Ravnica that you're going to find here. And this is where the differences really shine. Growth Chamber Guardian, 4 of those in the main. Gruul Spellbreaker, great card. Zertog Goblins here. Collision Colossus, Gruul Guildgate, and Stomping Ground. Out of the sideboard, another copy of Collision Colossus and Cindervines. 5th place is a Nexus deck. It's not Bat Nexus, it's not 4-color Nexus, it's not Nexus of Gates, it's Simic Nexus. So this is the only Nexus deck that did make it into the top 8. Now, of course, being in Simic colors, we're not going to find Teferi here, but a lot of the main cards will cross over into all these variations, and those include things like the 4 Nexus of Fates that you see here, 4 Root Snare, 3 Search for Azcanta, for example. And let's look at the new cards, and we'll find one of the big win conditions here. And that's 2 copies of Hydroid Crisis in the main. You also get Precognitive Perception, Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation, which is huge in this deck, Breeding Pool, and Simic Guildgate. Out of the sideboard, you have some more creatures to bring in if you need them. Biogenic Ooze, Incubation Druid, another copy of Hydroid Crisis, and Sagittarius Volley is also here. 6th place is Mono White Aggro, another deck that kind of just comes out of last season but gets a couple upgrades from the new set. But first, let's look at the core cards. 4 Benalish Marshal in this build, 2 Adanto Vanguard, 4 Venerated Loxodon, you got 4 Legion's Landings, 4 History of Benalia, seems pretty familiar. This copy is running the Ajani's out of the sideboard, 3 total. Here's your new cards. Tithe Taker is here, and Unbreakable Formation. Okay, 7th and 8th place was Mono Blue Aggro. We'll look at both copies of these decks. Again, another deck which feels mostly intact from last season, but there's one really big difference in this particular build. Now, you do have your 4 Tempest Djinn, 4 Siren Storm Tamer, a couple of Mistcloaked Heralds in here. You have 4 Merfolk Trickster, a lot of your small spells, Dive Down, Opt. You got 3 Spell Pierces, 4 Wizard's Retorts. So, what is new here? 4 copies of Terramander, and this card is great in this build. Now, the version that came in 8th place is very, very similar, as you can see from the deck list here, but it is running a little more from the new set. Here you'll find your 4 Terramanders again, but also a copy of Essence Capture in the main. And in the sideboard, some tech from last week, 2 copies of Fairy Duelist. Alright, so those were your results from the weekend. Overall, I think Standard's in a very good place right now. I'm excited to see what happens at the Pro Tour coming up. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.